Hello everyone. Today we are going to be going over pitching ratings, what ratings do, and which ratings are important essentially. So it's going to be very all-encompassing. We're going to start with the independent ratings, which are going to be stamina and hold runners. I just want to preface this by saying we're going to be going back and forth a lot between the profile tab, the ratings tab, and the editor tab based on what we are discussing. So stamina is essentially how long a pitcher can pitch and how effective they are pitching longer, essentially. So, for example, a pitcher with 50 stamina can probably go 80 pitches at a relatively high degree of effectiveness, but maybe stretch to 100 if needed. On the other hand, a pitcher with 65 stamina might pitch 90 to 95 pitches at a high level and then be able to reach back for 110, 115 if needed. Hold runners is going to be essentially stolen base success rate against. So there is a common misconception that appears to have been disproven by data from some relatively reliable sources, although I myself have not had the opportunity to really look into this yet. That it is not, in fact, catcher arm that determines stolen base success rate against. Hold runners is not what is preventing runners from attempting to steal, but rather hold runners is your stolen base success rate against, and catcher arm is your steal deterrent. So that makes hold runners a little bit more important, especially for pitchers who allow more runners on base, since it is, first of all, obviously a deterrent to steal, since you're going to be less inclined to attempt stealing against somebody with higher uh, caught stealing rate, essentially. And it's also going to allow you to catch runners once they are on base and get free outs, basically, which is obviously a big bonus to have. So, yeah. Next, we're going to talk about control. And control is, other than stamina and hold runners, really the only pure rating on a pitcher's card, as in, it isn't influenced by anything else. The control rating that you see right here is literally just control. Control is going to be how likely a pitcher is to walk a batter. So this will go up against a batter's eye to determine the probability of the batter drawing a walk. Higher control is obviously better since it's going to be allowing fewer walks. But one thing you're going to notice is that while it is almost integral to have a control of at least 40 to 45, and it's pretty nice to have those little boosts once you get up to 65 control. Getting past 65 control doesn't matter as much. You're already walking very few batters, and at that point, you're not making too much of a difference on your success as a pitcher. But those ratings are generally better used in movement or stuff, but obviously it's still good to have as high control as possible, especially with pitchers who are going to rely on a lot of balls in play with a good defense behind them, for example. Another thing to note with control is that catcher ability, which is on almost every team going to be pretty darn high, is going to reduce your walk rate even further in addition to your control rating, which is why, in part, it's easier to tolerate below 50 control, but it's not so easy to tolerate below 50 movement. Your catchers are going to make a big impact on your success rate there, and you can expect that pitchers with lower end control will see significantly improved results, and pitchers with higher end control will see a little bit of a boost there as well to their walk rate. Okay, the next thing we're going to talk about is movement and ground ball percentage. Now, the movement you see here on a pitcher is a combination of their actual movement and their ground ball percentage. One thing to note here is that ground ball percentage displayed on a pitcher card is just ground ball fly ball tendency, which only shows you what range ground ball percentage is in. So extreme fly ball is up to around 44%, I believe is the number. And then fly ball percentage, I think, goes up to 48 or 49% ground ball rate. Neutral goes up to 58%. Ground ball tendency goes up to 63%, and then extreme ground ball is anything above or 64 and above, rather. So while we know Walker Buehler is a ground ball pitcher, without going into the editor, we can't really tell what his ground ball percentage is in that 59 to 63% range. He could be a 59% ground ball rate, or he could be a 63, and that is obviously a pretty significant difference in the ground ball percentage. Now, movement is the other component, and that is essentially just going to be how likely a pitcher is to give up a home run. Another thing to note with ground ball percentage, in addition to reducing home run rate, it's going to impact what part of your defense is more likely to be used when calculating, or rather the weights of your defense when calculating balls in play being either hits or outs. So if you're a ground ball pitcher, your infield is going to be more heavily weighted. So if you got like a really good shortstop, third baseman, second baseman, having a ground ball pitcher can reduce their BABIP, and you could see significant improvements in terms of your runs against and BABIP allowed. If you have a really good defensive outfield, then you're going to want fly ball pitchers, since those are going to weight your outfield more heavily in determining the probability that a ball in play is a hit. Now, there are other things that movement does as well, but they're not quite as important. You're going to notice that movement is going to influence a lot of pitches, which is actually the next thing that we're going to get into. So next up on the pitcher, we've obviously got stuff, and this is the most complex rating that a pitcher has, because it's so difficult to tell how effective a pitcher is going to be at striking batters out. It's important to keep in mind that control, you can predict pretty accurately what a pitcher's expected walk rate is going to be based on their control. With movement, you have to somewhat consider the weight of ground ball percentage versus fly ball percentage, but ultimately movement is going to break down to being pretty easy to determine what its effects are, or rather, it can be relatively easy to predict, at least within a close range, what a pitcher's home run rate is going to be. Uh, there are obviously other things that modify home run rate as well, but movement is going to be the big one, and you can tell from a pitcher's displayed movement approximately where they're going to be. But with stuff, especially for high-end stuff pitchers, it gets real complicated with trying to determine what you can expect their strikeout percentage to be. Uh, so the first thing that I want to talk about is pitch quality. And this, or actually, no, the first thing we should talk about is velocity, because this is another relatively linear thing. So velocity is top of the pitch editor right here. You obviously have your different ranges of velocity. So velocity will influence your individual pitch qualities. So for example, we've got high velocity here, we drop it. We see that fastball and cutter just absolutely decimated. The curveball slider gets significantly worse as well in terms of their pitch quality based on the lower velocity. It also decreases your stuff rating it directly by a pretty significant margin. So we saw Walker Buehler's stuff dropped 20 points just from an increase or decrease rather in velocity. Now, the other big component of stuff is going to be your individual pitch rating. So the pitch that you see on a player's card is a combination of a lot of things, actually. So different pitches are influenced by different factors. You've got, for example, fastballs are more influenced by velocity. Breaking balls are going to be more influenced by ground ball percentage. They can have some influence from movement. Pitches like your sinker or your forkball are going to be influenced by movement and ground ball percentage more heavily. And yeah, different pitches are differently effective. But the big thing to keep in mind with this is the pitch you see on the player's card is not equal to the pitcher's pitch quality. But the pitches that you see on a player's card are going to be more indicative of how likely they're going to be to strike batters out. Uh, this actually gets really complicated. I don't want to get too much into this. I will probably, after I have a little bit more knowledge on the subject, be able to give more light into this. But essentially, your fastball pitches are going to be heavily influenced by velocity. Your breaking pitches are going to be influenced by velocity and a little bit of movement, a little bit of ground ball percentage. Your uh, changeup, circle changeup, and knuckleball are just completely independent of other ratings. So what you see on a player's page for those three pitches is actually just their raw pitch rating translated from the editor to your whatever rating scale you're using. So, for example, Walker Buehler's changeup, that's how good the changeup is. It's just that. It's all from the pitch rating because they are independent. Now, for how stuff functions, it is a little bit unclear exactly what goes into stuff. But the big thing you're going to want to consider is that the stuff displayed on a pitcher's page is inaccurate. You're going to have pitchers with more pitches, like Walker Buehler, for example, is a perfect example of this. Zach Greinke is another guy who's just got a lot of pitches. Those types of pitchers, Yu Darvish is another good one, are going to have a higher strikeout rate than three pitch pitchers like Caleb Ferguson. I don't know if you'd use him as a starting pitcher, but he's an example. I actually think all of these Dodgers starting pitchers have a lot of pitches. Somebody like on the Diamondbacks, Luke Weaver. I know he's only got three pitches. He's going to be a lot worse than his stuff indicates because he doesn't have the pitch depth that guys like Walker Buehler do. So even though his pitch quality is pretty good, he's still not going to see as high a strikeout rate as you'd like. Another thing to consider is what types of pitches do you have and how does your velocity synergize with that? So if you've got a lot of fastballs and breaking balls and high velocity, like Walker Buehler does, you're going to have a lot of success in the strikeout rate. You got like great circle changeup and changeup, you're going to have a high strikeout rate, pretty much regardless of anything else. If you got really great knuckleball and some decent pitches to go off of it, then you're probably going to have a high strikeout rate. Um, what else to discuss in this? I really just want to emphasize that pitch depth is a big factor here. I wouldn't necessarily say just scrap stuff rating because I don't really have anything better for you right now, but consider it a modifier. Every additional pitch a pitcher has of quality, of significant quality, is going to add to that stuff. So Walker Buehler's true stuff because he's got the 5 real strong pitches. He's got a slider, which is the best pitch in the game, synergized with high velocity. His stuff is probably closer to 80, borderline 85 than it is at 75, just because of the pure quality of his arsenal. Now, a couple other things that we haven't discussed yet. There are hidden ratings in the editor that do not appear on a player's card at all. These are hit batsman, wild pitches, and box. So, hit batsman is going to be really important in some cases. It's basically the same as a walk in that you're giving up a free base runner. There's nothing that can be done about it. So you want to make sure your pitchers have this at least not super high. I mean, a difference between like 5 and 10 is maybe 5 points of control, or yeah, on a 20-80 scale, it's about 5 points of control. So it's not massive, but it's something to keep in mind when you're considering pitchers. If you start to get pitchers with more than 15 hit batsmen, that needs to be an actual point of analysis on your pitcher. That could be very significant. Wild pitches and balks are essentially just batters taking an extra base. Now, it's notable that wild pitches can be combated with a high catcher ability to some degree. Catcher ability will help with pass balls and wild pitches, or reducing those rather, and ensuring that you allow fewer extra runners to advance. Now, since these ratings are not shown on a player's page, the only way you can kind of guesstimate where they are is to go to their pitching stats, advanced stats, and here they are right here. So you've got box, Walker Buehler. He has no box historically, so you can probably anticipate that he's not going to have too many box in his career. It's not going to be a big concern. Wild pitches, he's not thrown too many. Last year he had 4 in only 36 innings. That's a little concerning. But overall, he's not historically been a type of pitcher to throw many wild pitches. So I mean, because of this number, you're going to obviously have to watch him going forwards, but you can't anticipate that it's going to be a massive issue. Hit batsman, numbers never been too high. 6 in 2018, 7 in 2019, only 1 in 2020. So you can rely on him to keep that number low, prevent those unnecessary runners. And ground out percentage, I would also recommend looking at this. This can help you try to figure out what a pitcher's ground ball percentage is approximately. This is not the same as ground ball percentage, I think. It's not entirely clear what this statistic is, but you can compare it to other pitchers in the league to get a rough idea of where a player's ground ball percentage is. Now, another thing to note is that hit batsman does not naturally appear on the expanded pitching stats page. So what you could do is you go to view, edit, you click on your expanded pitching stats one, and you click edit stat row, and then you can choose whatever stats you want to see on a pitcher. But hit batsman is right here. So I'm going to click it. It's not where I want it to be. I want it to be by wild pitches and balks since that's the same type of analysis I'm running. So I'm going to drag it down here, and now I can see it right where I had it here. So you see that I'll go to basic view and then expand it again, and it's right there. That tool can actually be really useful for helping to get a perspective of pitchers that you like better. I don't use custom views because I'm lazy, but it is definitely a better way to analyze your pitchers statistically. Uh, Pitcher defense, I just want to say it's such a minor thing, you really should not be looking at it. The way I would put it is you're basically going to analyze your pitchers on your control and movement, and then you're going to look at stuff with keeping in mind the number of pitches, uh, and adding that onto stuff. And if you have two pitchers who you really just cannot choose between, then hold runners becomes something you consider. Stamina is also something you kind of factor in earlier on, and then you really factor in stamina and hold runners if you still can't make a decision. If you still can't make a decision, then you go to defense, but it's really just not that important for pitchers at all. It's not something I really consider ever in my analysis. Another thing I want to point out, this projected role right here is actually really important in how starting pitchers perform. If you have a projected role of bullpen or borderline starter, that's going to reduce a pitcher's actual performance by a significant chunk. It's just the projected role. So things that can cause your pitcher to have a projected role not of starter is low stamina, not enough quality pitches, not enough pitches, period. For example, a two pitch pitcher might not have a starter projected role. So those things can be issues. You want to typically avoid players that have those role or not projected starter role unless they're just absolutely dominant. Another thing to note is that the projected role does not affect relievers at all. It's only for starting pitchers that you need to worry about this. A player with a projected role of starter is going to be just fine in a relief role. No problems there at all. And those are the major points that I wanted to cover in this video. So as for how important each rating is, control, again, a catcher ability is going to help massively with that. You don't need to be too concerned about super high control. Generally, you're going to want control at least around 55 unless you've got a pitcher with dominant movement stuff combination. I would not ever really go lower than 45, 40 at the absolute lowest for starting pitchers. Sometimes, very rarely, for example, like last year's Tanner Scott was a good example of this, 35 control pitchers with really good stuff and movement, and paired with a very strong catcher ability catcher, you can get away with that. But it's really just something you want to avoid wherever you can. Movement, if you have movement really below 45, you're going to get absolutely shelled with home runs. It doesn't matter how few batter. I mean, unless you're Justin Verlander, that's the one guy. Justin Verlander, like an ideal Joe Ryan development, you're striking out a ton of batters. You're not walking hardly anybody. There's no one on base when you're giving up those solo home runs, but you're giving up a lot of home runs. So generally, movement below 45. I like to see my movement at 55 or higher, a lot like control, and movement is the primary factor for me in determining who is a really good pitcher. So if I see a pitcher with 65 movement, he's immediately on my radar. 60 puts pretty much any pitcher with good control or stuff on my radar as well. If you got 60 plus movement, especially 65 plus movement, and good, really solid stuff and control, you're going to be one of the top pitchers in the league. If you can get into that 70, 75 movement range, you've got massive potential and are absolutely a priority to pick up. Now, stuff. This again comes really heavily down into those deep arsenals. Pitchers with deep, powerful arsenals, guys like Walker Buehler, guys like Julio Urias to some degree, I think. Guys like, where is he in this bullpen? Dustin May to a lesser extent. Pitchers like that are going to have a greater deal of success because they're more pitches at a high level. Those types of pitchers are going to be the types of dominant strikeout rates that you're going to look at the top end of your league. So that's kind of what I look at. Strikeout rate, especially when I've got a good defense, is not going to be as important to me. If I'm looking for a quality, cheap pitcher, I'm going to look at somebody with really high movement and solid control, kind of bunt this stuff, just not be too worried about it. But when you're looking at your absolute top end pitchers, stuff is almost integral to seeing extremely outstanding performances just because it's a guaranteed out. And again, high catcher abilities will magnify that stuff. The higher the stuff, the better the impact of a high ability catcher. So just pairing that with a really powerful pitcher like Walker Buehler, it's going to be massively impactful. Ultimately, I would like to just make one note about what type of development you're looking for in your pitchers as well. This is going to be brief. I'll have a video on this later. But stuff, very easy to develop with TCR. Pitchers adding velocity will not only improve the overall stuff, but it will improve individual pitches, which then compounds into overall stuff as well. So, young pitchers who are likely to add velocity, you can expect pretty significant, sizable chunks of stuff getting added. Movement. If you've got pitchers or pitching coaches, I should say, who are ground ball tendency or preference, I should say, they can be big difference makers in your organization, especially if you've got. Well, I shouldn't say you've got one of those at the MLB level necessarily, but if you've got a couple of those throughout your organization, some really quality ground ball pitching coaches and developing your pitcher's movement, that will be big for their success. So anyways, I think that's just about everything I wanted to cover. I hope this video was helpful for you guys. Let me know if you've got any questions, and I'll see you on the next one.